My name is Richard Hartwell, and 6 months ago, I walked into a private dining room, believing my daughter had finally come back to me. But before the night was over, I would learn that the child I had raised, protected, forgiven, and funded for 36 years, had been sitting across from me with murder in her heart. At 68 years old, I thought life had already taken its cruelest swing at me when it took my wife, Mary Ann. She was the woman who stood beside me when I had nothing but one rented warehouse, one delivery truck, and a telephone on our kitchen counter. She believed in me when banks laughed at my loan applications, when drivers quit, when contracts fell apart, and when I came home smelling like diesel fuel with worry carved into my face. Together, we built a life out of long nights, second chances, and stubborn faith. Hartwell Marsh Logistics did not become successful overnight. I started it in Charlotte, North Carolina, in Mutngin Chinchum Tarmuiba, carrying freight nobody else wanted to touch, taking emergency calls at midnight, sleeping in my office when payroll was due, and promising myself that one day my family would never have to beg anyone for anything. By the time I was ready to sell, the company had contracts with major pharmaceutical firms, hundreds of employees, refrigerated fleets moving across state lines, and a reputation I had spent 42 years protecting. The final offer came from a Dutch logistics group, and after 19 months of negotiations, the number landed at $82 million. After taxes, lawyers, partners, and everything else life takes before it lets a man breathe, nearly $68 million would come to me personally. People told me I should celebrate. My advisors shook my hand. My CFO cried. But all I could think about was Mary Ann and how badly I wished she were still here to see it. She died in Hang In Ler Mui Chin after 18 months of ovarian cancer, and when we buried her, something inside my daughter and me broke in different directions. I became quieter. My daughter became harder to reach. We still had holidays, birthday dinners, polite phone calls, and those careful conversations where no one says what they really mean, but the warmth was gone. The bridge between us was still standing, but I could hear the wood cracking every time we crossed it. Then, 2 weeks before the money officially cleared, my daughter called me. Her voice was soft, trembling, almost like the little girl who used to run into my office after school and climb into my chair. She told me she missed me. She said she had been thinking about her mother. She said Mary Ann would have been proud of me. Then she asked if I would join her and her husband for a private dinner downtown. Just the three of us. No lawyers, no business talk, no distance, just family. I should have questioned the timing. I should have wondered why she suddenly sounded so tender after years of coldness. I should have remembered that desperation sometimes wears the mask of love. But I was a lonely old man who missed his wife and wanted his daughter back, so I said yes before she even finished asking. That Thursday evening, I put on the navy suit Mary Ann had chosen for me years earlier, drove through a warm September rain, and walked toward the Capitol Grill with something dangerous in my chest. Hope. I thought I was walking into a celebration. I thought maybe grief had softened her. I thought maybe money had given us one last chance to repair what death had broken. I did not know my son-in-law was already waiting behind a smile. I did not know my daughter had brought more than memories of her mother in that purse. And I did not know that the dinner I had prayed would bring my family back together would become the night someone tried to trade my life for $68 million. The first warning should have been my son-in-law's smile. He stood when I entered the Hartwell room, all polished shoes, expensive watch, and perfect teeth, acting like a man who had earned the right to be proud of me. "Richard," he said, gripping my hand too firmly, "tonight is about honoring everything you built." I looked at him and remembered every failed venture he had dragged my daughter into. The bourbon distillery that collapsed. The hotel that vanished into lawsuits. The crypto project he described with words that meant nothing. Every disaster ended the same way, with my daughter calling late at night, voice small and embarrassed, asking if I could help just this once. Over 9 years, just this once became hi-fi $1 million. He was not building a future with my daughter. He was spending her down while waiting for me to die. My daughter sat beside him in a green dress, wearing her mother's pearls, and for a moment the sight nearly softened me. Then I noticed her hand. Every few minutes, her left fingers touched the small black purse beside her plate. Not opened it, not moved it, just touched it, like a person checking that a secret was still there. I counted the touches because numbers had always calmed me. 4, 7, 11. Across the table, my son-in-law raised his champagne, took 2 careful sips, and then stopped drinking completely. That was the second warning. I had seen that man drink at funerals, business lunches, and Christmas dinners. Tonight, he ordered Pellegrino, no ice, lemon on the side, and kept looking from my face to my wine glass. "You feeling all right?" I asked him. He smiled too quickly. "Never better. Just pacing myself." My daughter laughed, but the sound came out sharp, the nervous laugh she used when she had broken something before I walked into the room. I tried to keep the conversation ordinary. He bragged about a Range Rover he had ordered. She asked about the lake house, then looked away before I finished answering. That was when I noticed the waiter. He was young, tall, careful, with dark eyes and an accent I could not place. He moved quietly, but he was not watching us like a waiter. He was watching my daughter. When he refilled my water, his eyes flicked toward her purse, then back to me, and for one strange second, the air in that private room felt heavy. My daughter lifted her glass and said, "To Dad, to Mom, to new beginnings." My son-in-law smiled. I smiled back. But inside, something whispered that this was not a celebration at all. I tried to ignore the feeling. At 68 years old, I had learned that instincts could sometimes be shaped by old grudges and old fears. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe years of watching my son-in-law burn through money had made me suspicious of everything he did, so I forced myself to relax. I cut into my lamb. I asked my daughter about a recent renovation project. I laughed at a joke that was not particularly funny. Outwardly, I looked like a man enjoying dinner with his family. Inside, however, my mind refused to settle. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed against the table. I glanced down and saw my CFO's name on the screen. Immediately, I knew what the call was about. For 19 months, we had been negotiating the largest transaction of my life. The funds were not supposed to clear until the following week, but there had been discussions about moving the timeline forward. I excused myself from the table and stood up. "Business?" my son-in-law asked with a grin. "The rich never get a night off." My daughter laughed a little too loudly. "Go ahead, Dad. We'll be here." I walked out of the private dining room and into the hallway near the kitchen. The moment I answered, my CFO sounded excited. "Richard, it's done. The wire cleared early. The money is officially in the account." For a second, I closed my eyes. 42 years of work. 42 years of sacrifices, risks, sleepless nights, and impossible decisions had just turned into a number sitting in a bank account. $68 million. My CFO continued discussing paperwork and schedules, but my attention drifted. I found myself thinking about Mary Ann, about how badly I wished she could have seen this day. When the call ended, I stood there for another moment, gathering myself before returning to the table. That was when I noticed someone approaching from the corner of my eye. It was the waiter. He walked past me at first, carrying an empty serving tray. Then he stopped. He looked toward the dining room entrance. He looked toward the kitchen. His expression changed. Suddenly, he seemed nervous, very nervous. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I know this is not my business." I frowned. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Please do not react." My stomach tightened immediately. "React to what?" The young man swallowed hard. "While you were on the phone, your daughter put something into your wine glass." For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him. "What?" He glanced around again before speaking. "A small white packet. Powder. She waited until you left the room. She poured it into your wine and stirred it with her finger under the napkin." The hallway suddenly felt colder. "You're sure?" I asked. The waiter nodded instantly. I watched the entire thing. I stared at him, searching for uncertainty, confusion, any sign that he might be mistaken. I found none. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. The young man's eyes met mine. "Because my uncle died this way," he said quietly. "And because if I stay silent and something happens to you, I will never forgive myself." In that moment, the celebration ended. The father in me wanted to reject what I had heard. The businessman in me knew better. One of them was lying. One of them was telling the truth. And within the next few minutes, I was about to find out which one. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The waiter stood there holding his empty tray while I stared at the floor, trying to process what I had just heard. My daughter, my only child, the little girl whose bicycle I taught her to ride, the teenager whose tears I wiped away after her first heartbreak, the woman I had spent years trying to protect from her own mistakes. The idea that she could be sitting inside that dining room after poisoning her father's drink was so monstrous that my mind refused to accept it. Every instinct screamed at me to walk back into the room, grab the glass, and demand an explanation. But another voice, the voice that had built a company from nothing and survived 42 years of negotiations, lawsuits, betrayals, and competitors, told me to slow down. If the waiter was wrong, I would destroy what little remained of my relationship with my daughter. If he was right, then something far bigger was happening than a single poisoned glass of wine. I looked at the young man. "Are you absolutely certain?" He nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir." I studied his face one final time. No uncertainty, no doubt, no desire for attention, just fear, genuine fear. That was enough for me. "I need your help," I said quietly. He blinked. "Anything." I glanced toward the dining room entrance. "In a few minutes, I need you to create a distraction." The waiter frowned. "A distraction?" "Drop something, spill something, make a scene. Just enough to pull everyone's attention away from the table." His eyes widened slightly as realization dawned on him. "You want to switch the glasses?" "Yes." He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "I understand." Then he disappeared into the kitchen. I stood alone in the hallway, trying to control my breathing. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from heartbreak. Because deep down, I already knew something was terribly wrong. The timing of the dinner, the sudden tears on the phone, the way my son-in-law kept watching my wine glass, the way my daughter kept touching her purse. Suddenly, every strange detail fit together like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I returned to the Hartwell room. My daughter smiled the moment she saw me. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's fine," I replied. She relaxed immediately. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair. "Good news?" "Very good news," I said. "The funds cleared." For just a fraction of a second, I saw it. The greed, the excitement, the hunger. It flashed across his face before he could hide it. My daughter squeezed my hand across the table. "I'm happy for you, Dad." Her palm felt damp. She was nervous. Extremely nervous. The conversation continued, but nobody was really listening. My son-in-law kept glancing toward my wine. My daughter kept forcing smiles. And I sat there pretending everything was normal while counting the seconds. Then it happened. The waiter emerged carrying a tray of expensive desserts. He took 3 steps toward our table and suddenly stumbled. Plates crashed to the floor. Chocolate splattered across my son-in-law's jacket. Glass shattered. Chairs moved. People shouted. For one brief moment, every eye in the room turned away from the table. And in that single moment, I reached forward. My right hand moved my wine glass toward my daughter. My left hand slid her wine toward me. Less than a second. Smooth, silent, invisible. When everyone looked back, the glasses appeared untouched. Nobody noticed. Not my daughter. Not my son-in-law. Not a single person in that room. My heart pounded as the waiter apologized repeatedly, and staff rushed forward to clean the mess. The trap had been set. Now all that remained was to see who would walk into it. The moment the waiter walked away, time seemed to slow down. Outwardly, nothing had changed. The dining room looked exactly the same. The candles still flickered against the green walls. Soft music still drifted through the restaurant. Other guests continued their conversations as if the world were perfectly normal. But for me, everything had changed. Sitting across from me was a woman I had loved every day of her life, and I no longer knew whether I was looking at my daughter or a stranger. My son-in-law picked up his napkin and began wiping chocolate from his jacket. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "People don't even know how to carry a tray anymore." His voice was irritated, but underneath it I detected something else. Impatience. The distraction had interrupted whatever timeline he was expecting. My daughter reached for her wine glass without hesitation. The wrong wine glass. My wine glass. The glass she believed contained nothing dangerous. For a brief moment, I thought she might not drink it. Maybe she would set it down. Maybe she would become distracted. Maybe fate would offer one final escape route. Instead, she lifted the glass and took a long swallow. Then another. My stomach twisted. No matter what she had done, she was still my child. Watching her drink from that glass felt like watching a car move toward a cliff while being unable to stop it. She smiled weakly and raised the glass toward me. "To Mom," she said. "To new beginnings." I lifted the other glass, but never touched it to my lips. "To new beginnings," I replied. My son-in-law watched me carefully. He was trying to appear relaxed, but I could see the tension building behind his eyes. Every few seconds, he glanced toward me, and then back toward his watch. He was waiting for something, waiting for me to collapse, waiting for $68 million to become his. The next several minutes felt endless. We talked about meaningless things: weather, travel plans, home renovations. Nobody cared about any of it. My daughter suddenly loosened the collar of her dress. "It's warm in here," she said. Beads of sweat had appeared along her forehead. My son-in-law laughed. "You're always cold. Now you're hot?" She forced a smile but did not answer. A minute later, she picked up her water glass and drank almost half of it. "The water tastes strange," she murmured. "Maybe you're nervous," her husband replied quickly. "You've been stressed all week." I watched his face carefully. He wasn't concerned. He wasn't confused. He was calculating. Then my daughter's speech began to change. Small changes at first. A word pronounced incorrectly. A sentence that trailed off unexpectedly. She blinked several times and rubbed her temples. "I don't feel." She stopped. "I don't feel right." For the first time, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. She looked toward her husband. He immediately leaned closer. "You're fine," he said. "Just sit down." But she was no longer listening. She pushed back her chair and stood. Her movements were awkward, unsteady. "I need the restroom," she whispered. She managed only 2 steps. Then her knee buckled. The entire room seemed to freeze. She grabbed the edge of a nearby table, knocking over a glass. Guests turned to look. A second later, her body collapsed. Her head struck the carpet with a sickening sound. Her arms jerked violently. Her legs twisted unnaturally beneath her. The scream that erupted from nearby tables barely registered in my ears. My daughter lay on the floor, convulsing, while people rushed toward her from every direction. And across the room, I saw something I will never forget for the rest of my life. My son-in-law was not shocked. He was not confused. He was not surprised. For one terrible second, before he realized others were watching him, I saw pure panic on his face. Not panic because his wife was dying. Panic because the wrong person had taken the poison. In that instant, every remaining doubt disappeared. The waiter had been telling the truth. My daughter had poisoned the wine, and the man sitting beside her had expected me to be the one lying on that carpet fighting for my life. The restaurant exploded into chaos. Chairs scraped across the floor. Guests jumped to their feet. Someone screamed for an ambulance while another person shouted for a doctor. My daughter's body continued to convulse on the carpet as terrified diners backed away from the scene. Through all of it, I remained seated for several seconds, unable to take my eyes off her. The image felt unreal, like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Then I looked at my son-in-law. He had knocked his chair backward while rushing to his feet, But what caught my attention wasn't his panic. It was the kind of panic. A husband watching his wife collapse should have been focused entirely on her. Instead, his eyes kept darting around the room, toward the exits, toward the staff, toward the people gathering around her. He looked like a man desperately trying to solve a problem that had suddenly gone wrong. "Call an ambulance," someone yelled. The matron was already reaching for his phone. That was when my son-in-law reacted. "No," he shouted. Several heads turned toward him. "No ambulance. We'll take her ourselves. It'll be faster." His voice cracked with urgency. Not concern, urgency. The distinction chilled me. A white-haired gentleman from a nearby table was already kneeling beside my daughter, checking her pulse and monitoring her breathing. Later, I would learn he was a retired cardiologist from Duke University. At that moment, he simply looked up at my son-in-law and frowned. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "This woman is having a severe neurological event. She needs emergency medical care immediately." My son-in-law stepped forward. "You don't understand. We can get her there faster ourselves." The cardiologist's expression hardened. "Sir, if you move her right now, you could kill her." The room fell silent. My son-in-law opened his mouth to argue again, then stopped. For the first time, he realized people were watching him, really watching him. His behavior no longer looked like concern. It looked suspicious. Very suspicious. The paramedics arrived 11 minutes later, though it felt much longer. They rushed inside carrying equipment and immediately took control of the scene. Questions were asked. Vital signs were checked. My daughter was placed on a stretcher. Her mother's pearl necklace had snapped during the seizure, scattering white pearls across the carpet like tiny pieces of a shattered life. As the paramedics prepared to leave, my son-in-law moved toward the ambulance. "I'm coming with her." One of the paramedics shook his head. "One family member only." Before he could argue, I stepped forward. "I'm her father." For the first time that evening, I saw genuine fear enter his eyes. Not fear for my daughter. Fear of losing control. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away into the rainy Charlotte night, my son-in-law remained standing on the curb, watching us disappear. And something deep inside me whispered that this nightmare was only beginning. The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights, hurried footsteps, and unanswered questions. Doctors rushed my daughter behind a set of double doors, while I sat alone in a waiting room that suddenly felt colder than winter. 20 minutes earlier, I had been celebrating the sale of my company. Now I was staring at a hospital wall, wondering whether my only child was going to survive the night. Across the room, my son-in-law paced back and forth, pretending to be a worried husband. To anyone else, he probably looked convincing. He ran his hands through his hair. He spoke in a trembling voice. He kept asking nurses for updates. But now that I knew what I knew, every performance looked fake. Every gesture looked rehearsed. Every expression felt calculated. About 2 hours later, a young physician finally approached us. His face told me the situation was serious before he even opened his mouth. "Mr. Hartwell?" he asked. I stood immediately. "Your daughter is alive," he said. "But she ingested an extremely dangerous quantity of clonazepam mixed with alcohol. A dose this large could easily have been fatal." The words hit like a hammer. Fatal. The doctor continued explaining medical details, but one sentence stood out above everything else. This amount was not accidental. I looked directly at my son-in-law. His face lost color. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely frightened. Not because his wife nearly died, because the plan had failed. The hospital immediately contacted law enforcement. Less than an hour later, 2 detectives arrived. They separated everyone involved and began taking statements. I told them everything: the phone call, the waiter, the white packet, the switched glasses, the suspicious behavior. The detective taking notes never interrupted me once. When I finished, she closed her notebook and asked a single question. "Mr. Hartwell, do you believe someone intended to poison you?" I looked through the glass toward my son-in-law, sitting alone at the far end of the hallway. "Yes," I answered. "I do. What happened next unfolded faster than I expected. The detectives obtained security footage from the restaurant. They interviewed employees. They collected the wine glasses before they could be destroyed. Most importantly, they spoke to the waiter. His statement matched mine perfectly. Every detail, every movement, every minute. Around midnight, the detectives returned. Their expressions had changed. They no longer looked like investigators searching for answers. They looked like investigators who had found them. One of them approached my son-in-law. "Sir, we'd like you to come with us." He immediately became defensive. "Why?" "Because we have additional questions." "I already answered your questions. You need to come with us." The performance vanished instantly. His voice grew louder. His breathing became heavier. He demanded a lawyer. He accused everyone of misunderstanding the situation. Then he made a mistake. "She wasn't supposed to." The words escaped before he could stop them. The hallway fell silent. Even he seemed shocked by what he had almost said. The detective stared at him. "Wasn't supposed to what?" she asked calmly. He froze. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the detective nodded toward her partner. Handcuffs appeared. My son-in-law began shouting. He claimed this was ridiculous. He claimed he was innocent. He claimed he loved his wife. But nobody was listening anymore. As they escorted him through the hospital corridor, he turned toward me. The hatred in his eyes was unlike anything I had ever seen. There was no fear now. No mask. No charm. No fake smiles. Just pure hatred. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This was never about family. This was never about reconciliation. This was never about celebrating my success. For years, I had believed my son-in-law was merely irresponsible and greedy. I was wrong. The man being led away in handcuffs had spent months planning my death. And as investigators began digging through his finances, phones, emails, and business records, they were about to uncover a conspiracy far darker than anyone imagined. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier the truth became. At first, everyone assumed this was a simple case of greed. A desperate husband convincing his wife to poison her wealthy father for an inheritance. That theory lasted less than a week. By the second week, detectives were uncovering evidence that revealed something far more disturbing. My son-in-law had not spent a few months planning this crime. He had spent years building the conditions that would make it possible. Financial records showed a pattern stretching back almost a decade. Every failed business venture had left behind hidden debt. Every failed investment had created another hole, and every hole had been covered with lies. What shocked investigators most was that my daughter had no idea how much damage had already been done in her name. Loan documents surfaced carrying signatures that experts quickly identified as forged. Business guarantees had been attached to her accounts without her knowledge. Credit lines had been opened using information she never authorized. By the time forensic accountants completed their review, the number exceeded $400,000 in personal liabilities. My daughter was drowning financially and didn't even know she was underwater. Detectives recovered thousands of text messages from my son-in-law's phone. Reading them was like watching a predator slowly tighten a rope. The manipulation wasn't obvious at first. It began with small suggestions, comments about how I never respected her, claims that I cared more about my business than my family, complaints that I treated her like a child. Then the messages became darker. He repeatedly told her that I planned to leave most of my estate to charity. He claimed I blamed her for mistakes she never made. He insisted that after Marianne died, I stopped loving her the same way. None of it was true, but lies repeated often enough begin to sound like memories. The most painful discovery came from my daughter's former therapist. 2 years earlier, the therapist had documented concerns about emotional coercion and controlling behavior within the marriage. According to treatment notes, my daughter had admitted feeling isolated, confused, and increasingly dependent on her husband for information about finances, family relationships, and even her own decisions. The therapist encouraged her to establish boundaries and seek independent legal advice. Shortly afterward, My daughter stopped attending sessions altogether. Investigators later learned why. My son-in-law had convinced her the therapist was manipulating her against him. One by one, he had cut every lifeline around her. Friends stopped calling. Relatives drifted away. Trusted voices disappeared. Eventually, the only voice left was his. Then detectives discovered the final piece of the puzzle. Several months before the dinner, my son-in-law had obtained clonazepam by falsely claiming severe anxiety symptoms. Pharmacy records showed multiple prescriptions. Search history revealed questions about overdose amounts, detection timelines, and how certain drugs reacted when mixed with alcohol. There was even a folder on his laptop containing inheritance projections based on different dates of death. My date of death. Seeing those reports made my blood run cold. The numbers were calculated down to the dollar. To him, I wasn't a father. I wasn't a human being. I was a financial event, a transaction waiting to happen. Meanwhile, my daughter remained in a medically induced recovery program, slowly learning the truth investigators were uncovering. Every new revelation shattered another illusion she had believed for years. The loving husband she trusted, the future she imagined, the marriage she defended. None of it had been real. And as prosecutors prepared formal charges, one question remained unanswered. When my daughter finally woke up and understood everything her husband had done, would she continue protecting him, or would she help destroy the man who had turned her into a weapon against her own father? 3 months after the poisoning, the case finally reached the courtroom. By then, the story had spread across North Carolina. Reporters filled the hallways. Financial analysts discussed the failed murder plot on television. Former business associates called me daily, asking whether the rumors were true. Most of them could not believe that a daughter had nearly helped kill her own father over money. The truth was more complicated than that, but complexity rarely survives once cameras arrive. So ever and do ever hearing. Not because I enjoyed it. Not because I wanted revenge. I attended because I needed to see the end of the story with my own eyes. My son-in-law entered the courtroom looking very different from the confident man who once wore $600 ties and bragged about luxury investments. The expensive suits were gone. The arrogance was gone. Even the charm seemed gone. For the first time since I met him, he looked exactly like what he was. A frightened criminal running out of lies. The prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Financial fraud, forged signatures, prescription records, digital searches, text messages, witness testimony. The restaurant waiter testified. The retired cardiologist testified. Detectives testified. One piece after another destroyed any chance of a believable defense. After several weeks of proceedings, the verdict arrived. Guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder, conspiracy, wire fraud, and forgery. The judge's sentence was severe, 27 years in prison. As deputies escorted him away, he turned toward the gallery one final time. His eyes briefly found mine. There was no apology, no regret, only bitterness. Then he disappeared through a side door and out of my life forever. My daughter's case ended differently. Prosecutors acknowledged the years of manipulation, coercion, and psychological control. They also recognized her cooperation after learning the truth. She accepted responsibility and entered a structured treatment program as part of a plea agreement. The sentence spared her prison, but it did not spare her consequences. Some wounds remain long after court cases end. Several months later, I visited her rehabilitation facility in Asheville. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older, somehow. The confidence she once carried was gone. We sat across from each other at a small wooden table near a window. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked down at her hands and whispered, "Dad, I don't know who I am anymore." Those words hurt more than everything that happened in the restaurant. Because for the first time, I believed she was telling the truth. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Neither do I admitted quietly. But maybe that's where rebuilding begins. For the first time since the poisoning, tears filled her eyes. And while neither of us knew what the future would look like, both of us understood that the real punishment had never been the courtroom. The real punishment was living with what had happened and somehow finding a way to keep moving forward. People often ask me, what happened to the money? They expect some dramatic answer. They expect me to say I spent it on luxury homes, yachts, or exotic vacations after everything I survived. The truth is much simpler. After the sale of the company officially closed, the $68 million arrived exactly as planned. But by then, money no longer felt like a victory. It felt like responsibility. It felt like a reminder of everything that had happened. I created a trust for my daughter, but not one she could access immediately. The funds would only be released years later if medical professionals, counselors, and independent trustees agreed she had truly rebuilt her life. If not, the money would go toward helping women trapped in controlling and abusive relationships like the one that nearly destroyed her. Some people called me cruel, others called me generous. I didn't care. I wasn't trying to reward or punish anyone anymore. I was trying to do what was right. I also kept a promise to the young waiter who saved my life. A week after the trial ended, I invited him to lunch. I asked him what he wanted most in the world. He didn't ask for a sports car. He didn't ask for a mansion. He asked for help paying for his younger sister's education and medical treatment for his mother. In that moment, I understood why he had spoken up that night. Character like that cannot be bought. It is built over a lifetime. I made sure his sister could attend school. I made sure his mother received the care she needed. And I helped him pursue the culinary career he had always dreamed about. Every dollar I spent on that family felt better than any business deal I had ever signed. Today, I still live beside Lake Norman. Most mornings, I sit on the dock with a cup of coffee and watch the sunlight move across the water. Some days I think about Marianne. Some days I think about my daughter. Some days I think about the young waiter whose courage changed the course of my life. Over time, I learned 3 lessons. First, money does not destroy families. Money reveals the truth that was already hiding inside them. Second, the people who save your life are often strangers who owe you absolutely nothing. And third, love does not disappear simply because someone betrays you. Even after everything that happened, part of me still loves my daughter. Perhaps that is the hardest truth of all. I am 69 years old now. I lost my wife. I lost the future I thought my family would have. And I nearly lost my life. Yet, every morning, the sun still rises over the lake. The water still moves. The world still turns. Life continues. And if there is one thing this story taught me, it is that surviving betrayal is not about getting revenge. It is about refusing to let darkness become the final chapter of your life. That's why I keep moving forward. That's why I keep showing up for another sunrise. And that's why, despite everything, I still believe there is more good in this world than evil.